The one thing for me is that time together and time spent is the most important thing. We just had no idea that day that our life was going to change like that.
Welcome, Andrea Turner-Boys. Thanks so much for joining Joe and I today.
Oh, hi, Anne and Joe. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honour and pleasure.
Andrea, what's one experience that really left a mark on you?
Yeah. So I take a deep breath because I haven't visited this for a while. The experience that I want to share was back in 2006. I'll set the scene for you. My husband turned 53 on the 12th of August, and that particular morning we were heading into the city to surf, and it was his fourth city to surf. I don't think he'd done them necessarily concurrently, and it was my first. And we'd spent the year getting quite healthy, and I had been walking a lot, and I was a lot fitter than I normally am. And the night before, we have our two little girls, Annie and Molly, 2 and 3, who we left with my parents. And we went into the city to surf. We parked at the Queen Victoria building in the car park underneath, and off we headed. Clinton, my stepson, who had just turned 18, also came with us that day. And that was back when not everybody necessarily had a smartphone yet. Clinton definitely didn't have a phone. So Michael and I had a phone between us. Probably, I think it's 14 kilometres from memory. We passed Clinton. We were laughing because we were like, we're actually ahead of the 18-year-old.
10-year-old, yeah, well done.
Yes, and exactly. And Michael gave Clinton his phone because we're together, gives Clinton his phone. And we're kind of just on North Bondi, and we'd been running and walking, and I couldn't run anymore. And I kind of looked at my husband and I said, I know you want to do a better time than last time. I said, if you want to go, I said, I'm fine because I'm not going to do any more running. I'm just going to walk. And I said, but there's so many people. Where will I meet you? And not having done it before. He said, it's okay. When you go through the gates, there's just this area on the left. Just wait there and I'll be there waiting for you. So I said goodbye and he ran off. And I got to the finish line and went through the gates, just like he said. At about the time that a lot of people who walk it, which I think is about 2 hours, there was a lot of people going through. And I started waiting and he wasn't there. Then I'm waiting and then Clinton comes through and he finds me straight away. And of course, he's got Michael's phone. So we're looking, we're waiting, we can't see anything. That day there was about 70,000 people. So we're milling around and we just couldn't find him. So we did the logical thing was get the bus back to the car because we live in the Blue Mountains. We thought, well, he can't really go anywhere without us. We went back to the Queen Victoria building. There's no Michael. Then we had a coffee and a cheesecake and thinking he's just going to turn up any minute. He's just gotten lost and he didn't come. I remember ringing my dad and then also my business partner. She was in Melbourne and I said, I've lost Michael at the Cedar Surf. And she said, oh, I think you should call the hospitals. At the time, I was like, oh, that's so alarmist. Really? I just didn't really think. So I hung up and I rang the Prince of Wales Hospital in Randwick. The lady at the reception said if something had happened, he wouldn't have been taken here necessarily. He probably would be St Vincent's. So call St Vincent's. Called St Vincent's and they said, nope, he's not here. The only logical thing I could think of to do, now there's a few hours have passed, is to leave Clinton at the car park because if he comes back, and take the car and drive back to Bondi. I got to Bondi and I could see by this stage, it's now like 2:30 or something. They're starting to pack up. Then I started having this kind of ominous feeling. So I went to the police station and I had an experience when I was in my 20s. My brother passed away in a serious car accident on the Pacific Highway and I had been the closest relative who was heading up that way on the same day. And I had gone into the police station and I'd been treated quite badly by the policewoman there that left a lasting impression. So I walked into Bondi Police Station and I was very nervous and I said, I actually said, please don't treat me like a nutter. Like I'm very calm, but I'm from the Blue Mountains and I can't find my husband. And we did the City to Surf this morning and they were so lovely. And she says, have you rung the hospitals? I said, I have, but there wasn't anything. They said, well, look, we've got central ambulance connections in the back. So let me go out the back. She gave me a yellow pages and the phone. She goes, why don't you just ring some other places? And then the intuition kicked in and I was madly trying to find the number of the Prince of Wales Hospital again, which I had rung. And then I can see in the back of the police station and I can see all these people putting their heads out and looking and whispering and talking. And then they came out and said, will you come in and sit down? And I'm thinking, oh my God. And they said, we found your husband. He's in Prince of Wales Hospital. And I'm like, well, is he alive? They said, that's all we know, that he is alive, but that's it. We can't tell you anything. They drove me straight there. They were so wonderful. They drove my car because obviously I'm kind of in a panic. And he had had a cardiac arrest at the finish line. He had run up to an SES person and said, I don't feel right, and then collapsed. And an 18-year-old cadet for St John's Ambulance was a couple of feet away, ran over, identified what had happened, that he's had a heart attack. And the paramedics were actually 200 metres away, and they came down and defibrillated, started his heart back up. If he had been anywhere on the planet that day, anywhere else on the planet, he would have died. But because he was at the Sea to Surf and he was at the finishing line where there's all these resources available to him, he was able to be shocked and brought back to life. And so, oh, it's so funny talking about it. I have that kind of visceral feeling in my body. But there's a few things that then happen. So I'm at the hospital and thinking all the little things that you think back. So that phone call that I'd made to the Prince of Wales Hospital that 3 hours before, if the lady had only just checked, because she just said, oh, he wouldn't necessarily have come here, he would have gone to St Vincent's, and she didn't actually check, and they were trying to call me. And my husband, as they did back then, had put the home phone number down for the contact details, not my mobile. So they had been trying to call me on the home phone all afternoon because they only had what was organised through the Sea to Surf on the record. And then Clinton, I've never really talked to him about what his experience, except that the police said, what's the state of where? I said, well, my stepson's waiting at the QVB in a car park. So she said, okay. So they just sprang into action. The police were so wonderful. Someone went and got Clinton and drove him to the hospital, but lights and sirens, because the police don't actually know what state Michael is in, right? They just know he's in intensive care and they've been trying to call me. And when you get there, they don't want to really tell you anything because I guess what I understand now, they don't want to build false hope. They really don't know. They've only got the handover from the ambulance at the scene. So I had access to a friend who had worked in intensive care before, and that was really helpful because she was helping me read between the lines and telling me the things that they're not going to tell you. So I knew that he'd only been unconscious for a short time because of the defibrillation, which she was telling me was, well, that's a good thing because his brain wasn't starved of oxygen for very long. Whereas in the hospital, they're like, oh, we don't know how he's going to wake up. And the treatment, I'm sure it's probably still the same, but in 2006 is to keep him on a cooling mat and lower his body temperature to almost like a freezing point to slow everything right down to give him some time to recover, and then they wake him up. Basically, we then had to wait for the next couple of days. We just didn't know how he was going to wake up.
Andrea, I know that there's probably more to the story, but I have to take a break here to just say to you, number one, the trauma of experiencing your brother that had died and then having this no knowledge about what on earth was going on.
Yes.
Those moments for you, what was the greatest fears that you were experiencing?
Well, I think firstly, there's a shock that happens. Yeah, I can't even recall what I was actually thinking. It's just, I think it's that instinct of just handling what's in front of you at the immediate time. It's like there isn't anything else anymore. When you get to the hospital in that situation, they usher you into a room, right, into the grieving room, because everybody doesn't know yet what the outcome's going to be. And all you want is information. And actually, when I got to the hospital were wonderful. I just wanted to go and be beside his bed and see him. And they were making me wait even longer. So now it's been hours and hours because no, you can't until the doctor comes to talk to you. And of course, they're working on their time, not your time. So it was just the immediate things. So the immediate things are Annie and Molly, my 2 and 3-year-old, are being looked after by my parents. So quickly calling them, telling them, you're going to have the kids for a bit longer. Is that okay? We're not going to be home tonight. This is what's happened. Ringing his family. Michael's the eldest of 7. And I rang his sister, lived not too far, and a few of them came in. Because again, we don't know what's going on. My thoughts at the time was very immediate and just wanting to have answers. It's really funny because I mentioned my intuition kicked in at a certain
Mm.
time. Before that, I was quite oblivious. And then the only thing you can just do is just stay present. And I didn't really think about what's going to happen. I was just dealing with it as it was there. When he woke up a few days later, he had no memory of anything, which we found out later that one of the drugs that they give you at the scene can affect your memory. So it was his birthday, and the night before we had stayed the night at mum and dad's, and we'd had a bit of a birthday cake and celebration. And his last memories of that, he doesn't remember going to the city to surf. He doesn't remember starting it. Nothing. So all the information that we found came afterwards. So he started to recover. He had some issues with short-term memory for a couple of weeks, but it went away. We came home and we ran a small business. We had a little warehouse in Penrith. It was a gift delivery service, and Michael worked in the business with me, and I had a business partner. And he's now home and recovered, and he's gone from being someone who he wasn't overweight, he wasn't a smoker, he wasn't a heavy drinker, he was a bit of a social drinker only, but silent stress. He had a couple of stents put in, and what they determined had happened is that on the Cedar Surf day, pushing himself a little bit running had broken off a piece of plaque in his heart. And so that, as that moved, that made his heart stop, and that's why he had the cardiac arrest. Then I had a couple of really amazing things that happened not long after that. He came home and was recovering, and he had to do a support group for people who've had a heart attack. And one of the things that happened was that he didn't have a memory of what happened to him. He doesn't actually know what the symptoms were or anything. He said to me, I went to the support group today and all these people are saying, oh, well, I got this pain here and this happened. And he said, well, I've got nothing. So his level of anxiety, if he had one little flutter, he thought that it was happening again. And then at work, a lady had come in from the Sydney Morning Herald to interview us for a news article, something to do with the basket case where we worked. It was so funny how things just show up. This was literally the week after it happened. And we start talking, and her father had had a similar heart attack and he had major depression afterwards. I just felt like it was a message to say, watch out for this. And she said, look, watch out for that because it's something that we didn't expect. And then the next thing that happened was a couple of days later, I had a very small team. I only had 2 employees, and her name was Karen. She came out. She goes, I've got the Penrith paper. And there's a story in the paper about this Ambo, who's a St John's ambulance with the volunteers, leader of a local one in Penrith. And they're talking about trying to raise funds for a defibrillator machine, which back then they were $4,000 and they weren't everywhere that they are now. He makes reference to something about the Sea to Surf. I rang the editor of the local paper because when you're in small business, you know everybody. And I'd met her a couple of times and she knew who I was. And I said, Alison, can I just ask? It's a bit weird, but I explained what happened. And I said, is it possible to find who this person is? Because I have a feeling that they might have been the person who worked on Michael, because you have all these questions and there's no one to give you any answers. And about 20 minutes later, I had the name Steve and his number. I called him. I explained who I was. And he said, yeah, I worked on your husband.
Gosh.
And he lived in Penrith, which we live in the mountains. Like Penrith is 20 minutes away from us. We arranged to meet so we could thank him. Michael was very emotional because obviously, he saved his life. We call him Save Your Life, Steve. That's our nickname for him. And the paper came and took a photo and put it on the front page at the time, which was hilariously funny to us. But there was a beautiful full circle moment because the article had been about them raising money for a defibrillator. I went to my local chamber meeting and I just stood up and I said, this is what's happened to Michael and he's going to be okay, but I really want to raise money for this defibrillator. And it was, I don't know, 80 people in the room, and 80 people just came and thrust money in my hand. We raised the 4,000 in like 3 days. We were able to say to Steve, here's a defibrillator for your group. So that's kind of in a condensed.
Gosh, so much in that story.
Yes.
I don't know where Jo and I start with this, Andrea. I'm going to start with the intuition. You said that there was a moment that kicked in. Can you recall that moment and what it was, or what made you go, actually, I need to ring the Prince of Wales back again?
It's a theme for my life, to be honest.
Mhm.
I'm a very intuitive person and I believe in intuition because it's actually served me many, many times. And then there's been lots of times when I haven't listened and haven't paid attention. And then you've got the hindsight. I had a
Yeah.
niggle. Why didn't I pay attention to it?
Mm.
I didn't have a niggle that day until I was at that police station. And then I just kind of knew something is not right. And I'm not sure why I was so obsessed with wanting to find the Prince of Wales number. By that stage, when you're leaning into the intuition, I'm just following what is an inner prompt. You need to call the Prince of Wales hospital back. And in the end, I didn't have to because obviously they came out. Um, that's the only way to describe it. It's the same thing when my brother passed away. I was heading up to Grafton and he was returning home with his wife and his 1-year-old daughter to Queensland because that's where they lived. And the last thing that I had said to him was, "Oh, I might see you on the road tomorrow." But they had left Sydney at 4 a.m. and I had a meeting at 7:30 in Newcastle. So I was a few hours behind. But I remember driving along and I heard the news and they said there's been a car accident that has closed the Pacific Highway towards Taree. And oh God, that's where I'm heading. The road's going to be closed, was my initial thought. And I remember exactly where I was. I was driving over the Hexham Bridge. Back then, we had car phones that were in the car. They weren't mobiles. Car phone rang, and it was the receptionist from where I worked. And she said, "Andrea, you need to call your dad. You need to call your dad. I'm so sorry. You need to call your dad. You need to pull over and you need to call your dad. Do not be driving. Please pull over and call your dad." I remember it was really odd behaviors that you do. I pulled over and instead of just stopping the car and using the car phone, I pulled over and ran to a phone booth that I saw. But as I'm running to that phone booth, the intuition kicked in and I knew, I suddenly remembered 10 minutes before hearing that thing and I've now got to call my dad. And as I'm calling my dad, I know what he's going to tell me because the intuition kicked in. It's like everything, it's like the little dots
Yeah.
joined together. And actually, as he answered, I said, he was crying and I said, "Oh my God, I know what you're going to tell me." That was the first thing I said out of my mouth. And he said, "Yes, Matthew's been killed in a car accident." That was another time that just in that moment, you just know. I don't know how to describe it.
Andrew, before we
Mm.
go on, I do need to ask how Michael is today.
Michael is great. He is wonderful. It's interesting because the event happened to him, but it also impacted all of us as a family.
Yeah.
He did have some mild depression afterwards. He would see very, very unhealthy people and look at them and wonder, why is it happening to me and not to you?
Mm.
Which I think is just normal thoughts. He knows he had a second chance at life and he is so disciplined. He walks every day. He's had some struggles. He went from having no medication to suddenly you've got to take this medication for the rest of your life, which he's had some issues with. He goes to see the heart specialist every year. They're very happy with his progress and he's still here. It's 20 years ago.
Wow, that's crazy, 20 years. Can
Mm,
we circle back though a
mm,
little bit? Because that's an important point you talked
sure.
about, not just the heart attack, but how that impacted not just your husband, but you mentioned it impacted everybody. So talk us through how it impacted you.
The one thing that everybody talks about, and definitely the same for me, is that time together is the most important thing. You just never know. We just had no idea that day that our life was going to change like that. Being grateful, being present, all of the things that we strive to do in our life and our families and in our world just don't really matter. It's my husband. I adore him. He's my partner. And we nearly lost him. I had 2 children under 5. It was a wake up call. And that has just always stayed with me, just being grateful for every day that we have. And Michael really took it on board because he's just been so disciplined with his health. The other thing it taught me was that invisible stress is something that everybody has and the impact that it has on our bodies. As I said, Michael wasn't a drinker, a smoker. He didn't take drugs. He'd never taken drugs, actually. He was pretty clean living, except for maybe indulging in chocolate. He wasn't terribly overweight. He'd always played sport. You just can't tell. But when I look back at our life and I know past events, I'm sure stress carried in the body has had an impact.
Andrea, I know that he went through a moment of why me and some depression. Was there any role that fear played for you where you were fearful of each morning how he's going to be?
Funny, when you say it's fear, it is probably fear, but I don't think of it as fear. I just wanted to give him the support that he needed. And he didn't fall into too deep of a depression that it was unmanageable in our life or it had such an impact. But we did adjust our life. So when he worked at the basket case with us, he left a very high paying job. We were so happy with that decision because we were second time parents. We have three sons between us. He has two sons, and I have a son from our previous relationships. And then we had these two little girls. We wanted to spend as much time with them as we could, and it didn't really matter. Big salaries didn't matter. What sort of car we drove didn't matter. All of those things just don't matter. And then it was about having a balanced quality of life that we had in our business. That actually worked really well. Whilst we didn't have huge amounts of money, we had quality time and our kids got to see their dad. We both worked 4 days a week. The kids were only in daycare for 3 days and the other 4 days they were fully with us. Just as a side note, Steve now lives around the corner.
Oh,
Even though, yeah, no, his life moved on and he ended up buying a house around the corner from when we bought a house, which was unbeknownst. And we also found out there were a lot of medals awarded from the governor. This happened in August, it was early November that year. We went to a ceremony in the city. We met the 18-year-old cadet that had first identified. And of course, they don't know anything. We chatted with their parents and they just couldn't believe he was standing there. And their son, who was only young, had been very stressed and upset by what had happened and had wondered whether he had survived. And the last thing that also wasn't great was for the depression was that on the day we left Prince of Wales Hospital, so about a week after the incident, this admin person came down, call us into the office. I'll never forget this. This had an impact on all of us, especially Michael. She said, I'm just letting you know that we had 297 cardiac arrests come to this hospital last year and only 4 have survived. And you're the fifth. I look back now and go, why did you have to tell us that? I mean, it helped us to understand the brevity of, oh my God, how lucky we are. But it didn't help
No.
Michael, I don't think.
Well, particularly at the time, because you said that he had no memory of what happened. So he was very toey, I'm going to use the word, on every little pain that he had.
Yeah.
And to hear that news, it's going, well, what if it happens again? What if I have another heart attack? And does that mean that my chances are less? All of those things, I imagine, Andrea. But I want to ask you that question too, around him being concerned about all of the minor pains that he had. Did that heighten your level of anxiety about, was it possible that he was going to have another heart attack?
I think I didn't really think about it. The first incident that he had where he had a bit of a panic attack, he was out of the ICU and now he was in this heart recovery ward.
Yeah.
So maybe it was 4 or 5 days later. And he had some fluttering and he panicked. He thought, and he called the nurse. He said, something's happening again. And they were just like reassured him, look, everything is fine. We've just run some tests. It's fine. And I was sitting there. I remember just thinking, okay, this is anxiety. And this is an anxiety attack or a level of anxiety. I'd never seen him have anxiety before. So for me, it was just almost like taking an inventory. So these are the things that I'm going to have to be prepared to deal with or support him in. And there was only one other time. Again, he's a baby boomer from an era of stoicism and you don't talk a lot about things that are going on. He has talked about it, but it's not something he's processed a lot, but just through his life.
So I'm hearing that you had this sense of trust that things will be okay, focus on the day-to-day, focus on the fact that you can spend those 4 lovely days with your children and they only have to go to care 3 days a week, focused day-to-day rather than big picture, and you trusted.
Yeah, I really did. And you know what? Trust and intuition are such big themes in my life. Before we had our daughters, I had 6 miscarriages before we had Annie, our eldest daughter. I remember Michael and I having a conversation about how many times, because I didn't have an issue falling pregnant, I had an issue holding on to the pregnancies. I have a blood clotting disorder that I didn't know I had until after the miscarriages, because I'd had one son when I was quite young. I just knew, again, intuition. I just knew we were going to have a baby, and I knew we were going to have a girl. I just did not know why. But I said that to him. I said, I don't know how many more times I can do it either, because it's very traumatic to fall pregnant easily, but then you become so heightened in your awareness of your body. The second I'm miscarriaging, I'm having a miscarriage, I know that's how it got to be. How many more times can we do this? Well, I'm certain. So there's a certainty of that intuition, and then there's the trust. And then, of course, the seventh time we had Annie, and it was not without problems. She was literally holding on. But again, I just knew she was going to survive, and she did. And there's just this intuition. And if you have the trust, and then I guess it was like that with Michael after he'd survived. He had 2 stents in his heart. They were giving him, clean bill of health. And he wasn't someone who had to reform from smoking and drinking. So I knew that we're really well set up for him to live a long life. But again, I didn't really think about it, Joe. It's just that trust, we're going to be okay.
Has that been something that's played out your whole life for you, Andrea, or have you noticed that you've had a strong intuition and trust?
It's played out so many times in my life, and so many times. Also, there's been times when I've been so frustrated at myself because I didn't listen to it. Yeah, I've had lots of times, and I've kind of had to be very self-reliant. I didn't have supportive parents growing up. I didn't have a supportive mother, a great relationship. I've carried a lot. I've leaned into that experience. My grandfather was clairvoyant. And he had come over as a 10-pound pom. He was an electrician, and he had come over to Australia with his wife and his 2 daughters, one of which was my mother. She was 2. And he obviously, being clairvoyant, he used to just give readings. He used to charge people $5 for a tape, and people would just come to him. And I can remember him talking with me and telling me stories. And he said, people think that clairvoyants are going to see into the future or see things. He said, I get some pictures, but they're more symbols, and it's a feeling. And then he said, and I put it together. And that was like not weird. I just grew up with that. Pa was clairvoyant, but he was just a regular man who worked a job and just happened to do this on the side. So I don't know if the intuition has come from that. I definitely do not think I'm clairvoyant, but it's definitely been something that it's played out a lot. With my daughter, we were overseas one year, and she was coughing and incessantly coughing. We couldn't work out why. She didn't have a cold. She didn't have a history of anything. Then I just had this dream, or had this moment. It's a form of asthma. We were in Paris, and I had my computer. So I went onto Google and I quickly typed Annie's story. Annie did have a lot of medical conditions. She survived a very traumatic pregnancy, but put all the information in and asked it to translate it to French, and then found a GP, happened to be in the same street we were staying in, and took it to her. I said, could it be some sort of asthma? She checked her and she came back and she says, yep, it's asthma. It's environmental asthma. She needs a puffer. We got her a puffer, and Annie had never had asthma before. And I don't know why I thought that. I don't have asthma. There's no asthma in our family. But again, that's what I'm talking about, this intuitive side that just sometimes kicks in. And after that, she had the puffer, and then she stopped coughing. She was fine. But that took us like 3 weeks of our 6-week holiday to work out. This poor little thing. She was 7 and she was having asthma, but just didn't have words to explain that she's not getting a breath in properly.
You said sometimes you don't listen to it. Why don't you listen? Or what stops you from listening?
Good question. I think because society tells us that that's very woo-woo and weird, and I'm sure that my mind plays that part. Oh, you're being ridiculous, or that's not real. And so you talk yourself out of it. But I do say, if there's a niggle or a red flag, I had a lot of conversations about intuition with people, because hindsight, that's why they call it hindsight, but a lot of people will identify that little niggle or red flag but didn't necessarily act on it, because I think it's just easy in our mind to talk ourselves out of it. Oh, we're being dramatic, or we're being unnecessarily fearful or cautious, or whatever label we want to put on it. And then the mind starts to chatter, and then we are moving out of our intuition then, and then we're in our mind and we're having an argument, and it's kind of gone. So I don't know why I do that, except like anyone, not good mind discipline, maybe.
I think you sort of hit on it a little bit, Andrea, when you said that we as a society don't really honour it. We think it's a bit woo-woo, and yet maybe it's not. Maybe our logic comes in way too often. Our minds are very good at processing, they're very good at maps, but they're not always that good at guiding us to where we need to go sometimes.
Absolutely. And the word logic, that's what I couldn't find. You're right. It's like the logic of our mind just talks us out of it.
Yeah.
Because we don't understand where it comes from, or it's that spiritual side, I suppose, that some people call it. I don't know. Some people trust it implicitly, and then the others that don't, or don't believe in it or question it. But I've just had too many times I can pinpoint.
What a gift that you've learnt to trust it. There's been enough examples where it's been exactly what you needed to listen to. It's directed you to the right place, and it's tempting for that logical part of our mind to sort of jump in and say, oh, but no. On paper, surely not.
Well, I would say, Jo, that I'll put into a verb that I'm learning to be more trusting of it. I would love to say to you, oh, I just listen to my intuition all the time and I trust it all the time. And the truth is that I don't. But it's a theme for me that I want to keep working on it to get better at it, because I think it never lets you down. You lean into that.
You said that there was 2 days where Michael was kept on that cold mat.
The cooling mat.
Cooling mat. And so for 2 days you didn't know the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
What kept you going in that really tricky moment, or 2 days?
There's a few things that I can remember. One was when I reached out to touch him, he was icy cold, which was so alarming. And what kept me going was thirst for information. I love doctors and nurses and all the people who do any of those professions. But when I had my daughter, and she had been in the intensive care unit for 10 weeks, she was born prematurely. And even then, you just have to deal with it because it's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And I just kept arming myself with information. So I knew that she was going to be born preemie. I had such a problem pregnancy that they had warned me so many things. So I was like, right, I need to understand what the NIC unit is, and I need to talk to a doctor who gave me what to expect. I felt very fortunate. I was very proactive because I just wanted to know. I just kept thinking, knowledge is power. I can deal with it if I know what's going to happen. Even though those unpredictabilities in there, there's still a little bit of knowing, like, she's going to be born and this is going to happen in this machine. As I said, I love doctors and nurses, but for them, what they're doing is their daily job that is very routine, and they're not in a moment of the worst day or moments of your life. They are at work doing what is routine. So what I had discovered was some doctors and nurses seem to be very present to understanding that, and then there are definitely some that aren't. So their delivery, their dismissiveness, their apparent lack of compassion or patience. And he'd been in the NIC unit for about 4 weeks, and I used to come in every morning, and the first thing I would do is open up the notes and I would read through how she was overnight. And in week 4, some nurse comes flying across the room and says, "You're not allowed to read that. You're not allowed to read those notes. They're only for the doctor. Or if you want to read those notes, the nurse has to be with you." And I remember just looking at her going, I've been reading them every day for 4 weeks. No one's ever told me that before. The continuity of procedures is very tricky. So in that moment of those 2 days, I just kept asking questions. I just kept asking questions and finding out information. And my approach was, I'm going to be the kindest patient person that they have to deal with, because I understand that they're in a very difficult role, and I don't want to make their shifts worse by being someone who's annoying or difficult. Yep. These are the kind of my thought processes, because I thought they'll take the best care of us as a family and Michael if I just honour their work and not be in their way and just ask questions. And we had some beautiful nurses that were fantastic. And again, it wasn't thinking about the future. It was what's in front of me. And it did help having someone who had worked there, because they tend to talk in jargon a lot of the time. And you're holding on to any little nugget. There's some beautiful things that happened as well. Someone, we don't know to this day, when you run through the City to Surf finish line, they give you a medal, a medallion on a ribbon. Someone had put the ribbon in his bag. Now, he didn't make it to the finish line because he actually ran up to, what do they call them, SES person, just before the finishing line. And when I had crossed that 20 minutes or 30 minutes later, I crossed with a big crowd of people. Apparently, they must have been working on him and I just didn't even see because it was like a big wave of people. But someone had put into his pocket the medal that he didn't get because he had gone through the gates.
Wow.
Beautiful things like that.
What you're describing, Andrea, is you stayed open and curious. What you were doing in the hospital, you were in the present moment, but you didn't close down. You didn't get angry at what wasn't happening. You said, no, I need to know more. In essence, you worked with the hospital staff. You asked questions, you didn't get in the way, but you just wanted to be part of it and let them do their job.
Yes, yes. Well, that's right, because they're the experts and it helped having a bit of an understanding. People are frightened of lawsuits or there's so much that they can't say or they don't want to say, or we've all heard stories about they paint the worst case scenario. And I think I knew enough because of what had happened with Annie. That's what they're doing. And so I'll just listen and then focus on you waking up and being well. To give you an example, we don't know how long he was starved with oxygen, so we don't know how he's going to wake up. What does that mean? Well, he might not be able to speak. They're giving you the worst case things. And then me finding out that through information, well, no, it was about not less, it was a minute. And then the prognosis with the minute is actually so much better, like it's increased exponentially by whatever percentage was at the time. By being curious and asking questions, it gives you hope to hold on to, because if you just listened to a doctor or whatever, you could potentially fall into a heap and you just don't want to in that moment. You want to be present for every second of what's happening. I didn't have a conscious thought of that. I think that's just the way I am.
It's how you operate. What a brilliant, you put those together, trust, intuition, openness, curiosity, and working with people. It's a pretty strong combination of life and how to be.
When you reflect it back to me that way, I think, oh yeah, it probably is, isn't it? I didn't give it much thought. So even talking about it like this gives you new things to learn about that experience. It's like, yeah, okay.
Well handled, because it's an incredibly stressful and unknowing time. As you said, there was a lot of unknowns. Was Michael going to survive and how was he? And there was some times where you just didn't have the answer to that. So wow, Andrea.
Yes, it's been quite a while now, but sometimes it comes back. Greg Page from The Wiggles, when he had his cardiac arrest after a concert a few years ago, we saw on the news, and I just looked straight at Michael. We only had the snippet of the news story. And I said, I'm telling you now, exactly the same thing happened to him that happened to Michael. And then later on, we found out it was exactly the same. So he had physically exerted himself in a concert. He'd gone to the side of the stage and he'd just dropped. And then a nurse in the crowd, and there was a defibrillator at the RSL, defibrillated him back to life. And if they hadn't, and that hadn't been there, he wouldn't be there. And now he's channeling that into making sure there's more defibrillators and awareness for people. Even that was intuition. I just said that he's had exactly the same experience that you have. And again, I don't know if he has a memory issue, but Michael still doesn't remember. All the things that we know now has been from all the people who've told us things that I'm able to even share that story with you. Because if it was just from Michael's perspective, he wouldn't be able to tell you anything,
Wow. So what a story, Andrea. And I love that you're sort of now reflecting on the fact that there's been this thread of hope, intuition and trust woven itself all throughout your life, with your experiences with Annie, with your experiences with your brother, and then your experiences with Michael. So thank you for sharing all of that. You've sort of, I guess, in some ways alluded to this, but what would you say would be the greatest gift of these experiences?
Oh, the greatest gift. I think the greatest gift would be the gift of what life is. We hear it all the time with, it's like, oh, a second chance at life or being present. It's like, I just don't take anything for granted, and it stays that feeling of the moment you start taking something for granted, because we all do it. I've got an internal barometer that goes, oh, no. So it gives a perspective constantly. It's like a little beacon that just comes on. It's like of being grateful and an awareness that we are so fortunate And what I've learned from it is just to not let that waver too far off out of the way. I just do not want to take it for granted because I'm very aware all the time how grateful we are and how lucky we are. Especially when the lady said the moment when she gave the statistic, it was confounding. It was just so sobering. That was the moment that you put the pin in it. This is what this means. Shows you how lucky you are.
Wow. What would you tell your 10-year-old self knowing what you know now?
I probably would tell my 10-year-old self that everything is going to be okay and everything is always going to be okay, even when it doesn't feel like it is, and to just trust that intuition. I've shared times with you today of times I've listened to my intuition, but there's a million times that I didn't listen to my intuition and got bogged down in difficulty or challenge because I'm confused or I don't know what to do. And so I probably would tell my 10-year-old self, the minute that you get the hint of what intuition is, just lean into it and just stop the worrying. I would live my life in more present terms. I was very present in those moments at that time, but to live more in your life, be more present without the logic noise all the time. That's what I would tell my 10-year-old self. Not that a 10-year-old would necessarily grasp that concept.
But nonetheless, a good message for us all.
Go try. Everything's going to be okay. Just listen. Watch fairy tales. It's like, oh, listen to your heart. And then, you start to learn, listen to your heart. It's like you got to do logical things.
Yeah.
That's another way of that's another way of describing intuition. And we question it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
We go to the head rather than listen to the heart, huh?
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
So given all of that, Andrea, what would be your top tips for others?
A friend of mine does a talk on this, and she says we spend a lot of time between here, and intuition lives in your body, it's in your stomach, in that heart area, wherever you want to call it. And what I'm learning to do is recognize when I'm spending too much time here. I've got a situation at the moment where I'm not actually sure what the next step might be, and so what I keep doing is I keep going up here. Whereas what I'm learning to do and what I think that I need to do is actually slow down, take some deep breaths, go for a walk in nature, because I think nature is somewhere that people can feel a connection, and just listen for the whispers, because intuition doesn't yell. Intuition whispers to you. And if you're spending so much time here and the noise of that conversation and trying to work it out here, you won't hear the whispers. So if you're listening to this and you're wondering, just listen for the whispers.
Listen for the whispers. I love that. Andrea, it has been such an honour sharing the microphone with you today. Thank you so much for trusting us to hold your story as you've shared some really big stories today. Really appreciated it. Thank you.
Look, it's just a pleasure, and it's so lovely to talk with you both. I think your podcast is wonderful, what you're doing, and I'm just so glad that you're doing it. I'm one of many stories out there. I'm sure you'll hear so many more, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, that's our episode for today of What's Fear Got to Do with It. Thanks so much for your company. We hope you found it insightful and it left you with some helpful tips from our guests and some great points for you to reflect on. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Substack or follow us on your favourite platform and leave a review. We'd love to know your thoughts. Maybe you'd like to be a guest, or you know someone who you would like to hear their story. Reach out to us on Insta at whatsfear_podcast or email us at info@whatsfear.com. All the guests' show notes are below, and until next time, from Jo and I, take care, stay curious and keep the conversation going.